We all had to write a paper on Hitler, I'm sure, at some point growing up in high school, but it doesn't make us Nazis.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Mark Claire.
Howdy, folks. It's your old pal Mark Claire here with another edition of Lions of Liberty. And even though you're hearing my voice right now, I'm actually not going to be hosting today's program. That honor is going to go to the venerable Brian McWilliams, our resident Gary Johnson expert, Gary Johnson critic, Gary Johnson aficionado. Because, well, when life gives you libertarian forums, you make libertarian forum review podcasts out of them, and that's exactly what life did to us by tossing out a libertarian forum featuring Gary Johnson and Bill Weld this past Friday, hosted by John Stossel on Fox Business. Now, we originally had an interview scheduled with my man Remzo W. Martinez of the Remzo Republic podcast. I did have to bump him to get this breaking news out there, breaking analysis, you might say. But I know Remzo's listening, and I know he understands. So that interview with Remzo Martinez will air this coming Wednesday on episode number 241. So be sure to check it out. And as you may have surmised, this is episode number 240 of this program, which means you can find the show notes featuring links to everything discussed over at lionsofliberty.com/240. And without further ado, Brian, take it away.
Thank you, Mark, for that lovely introduction. Yes, I am the resident Gary Johnson curmudgeon, the man of all Johnsons. It's maybe not the most appropriate thing to say, but that's who I am. So, yes, we're going to be taking you into the Fox Business Libertarian Town Hall that was on Friday, August 26th. Of course, moderated by the great John Stossel, who never hesitates to really cut in there with some of his commentary, which we'll get into. Now, on the show, which is 240, as you heard Mark mention, we will be talking about numerous topics. We're going to try to get into not just the Libertarian Town Hall, but also a couple other things that have come up recently. So I wanted to bring in a few friends, a few compatriots of mine in the land of liberty. First off, how about we introduce Mr. Howard Snowdon? Howie, what's happened over in Virginia, man?
Ooh, not too much. Just another hot day.
It's a hot day in Virginia. What a shocker. Is it? And it's just hot, sweaty mosquitoes. You know, like humidity is real high over there, I think.
Yeah, humidity is awful.
Yeah.
I used to live in Arizona, and a dry heat really is much better.
No, without a doubt. That's pretty much the only thing stopping me from moving back to Pennsylvania, I think, is the humidity. That and the women are better looking in LA. I mean, let's be honest. Now, this is also a drinking episode. We're going to do this in the Libertarians at LivingRooms Drinking Liquor fashion. So, Howie, do you have a delicious beverage?
I do. I'm drinking Sam Adams 20 pounds of pumpkin. I guess it's not really that season yet. It's so hot and
it is.
I'm
hot.
pretending.
Yeah, but it's nice. I was gonna say, it's not one you would keep it in the cupboard, right? Like you bought it in a store. The Halloween or the October pumpkin time has come. It's upon us.
I bought it this morning.
Nice. I love a man who's like, you know what time is it? 9 a.m. I gotta buy me some pumpkin beer. I also have another friend. You know him well. He's been on the last couple episodes of Mr. Johnson's Liberty Hood. The always mysterious legal counsel, Rico.
What's up, my friend?
Not much. Just a little bit of Liberty talk on a Sunday, which is when we're recording this bad boy. I got some fantasy drafts, Rico. Do you have fantasy drafts after this?
I hate fantasy football, so I'm done with it.
You're over it? Why? You just can't hack it?
Boring. If I have to go to another bar and hear people talk and tell me about their quarterback and how many points he had and why they lost by 1 point because their kicker missed an extra point, I can't take it anymore.
Too bad, man. That's the world we live in now. Deal with it.
I enjoy the fantasy mixed martial arts myself.
I was going to say, no, that doesn't surprise me at all that you would be into that.
I'd take CM Punk #1 in my MMA draft.
Did he play? Did he fight yet?
Coming up soon.
All right.
I think it's the next pay UFC.
Oh, big pay-per-view. All right. Rico, what are you drinking over there?
I'm also pretending I'm on a beach, looking out into an ocean and enjoying life. So I'm drinking a Mai Tai.
Just drinking a Mai Tai, high on some LSD. Love it.
Exactly.
And we got one more joining us as well. It's been a while since we heard the melodious tones of Mr. JB Lubin. JB, what's up, bud?
Hey, Hey, Brian. Nothing much. Sorry, I was in a daze there.
I couldn't tell at all. You played it off smooth. Hey, by the way, what did you think? I wasn't on this last time we talked, but just real quick, tell me briefly your thoughts on the Democratic convention when it happened in Philly in 30 seconds.
Well, how was the city? It was a nightmare for what part I was in the city for, but I actually had to go back to New York for something, so I missed a good chunk of it.
You lucky devil.
Yeah.
That's too bad. I was just curious to see if people were just going up to vendors, like hot dog vendors on the street, and just demanding free hot dogs and yelling that it was socialism if they didn't get one.
Not that I saw, unfortunately, but I wish I could have, had a greater part of it, but wasn't around really.
Oh, terrible. All right. Well, I'm drinking a Pacifico over here, being it's a warm summer California Sunday. So let's do it. We got our drinks. Let's launch into some forum talk, guys. Now, first off, let me just say, as I mentioned, I love it when John Stossel is actually doing these forums because John Stossel, dude, he's a straight up libertarian thinking guy, and he is not afraid to call them on their shit and has done it multiple times during this, which we will get into. But let's start. I figure it's just easier probably to go chronologically and kind of the topics they've talked about. So let's just go from the very beginning and just say, give me your initial impressions of when it opened up. JB, what did you think when it started out here? How did they come across at the beginning of this latest town hall?
At the very beginning, well, I thought I'll have to echo what you said about John Stossel. I think he's great, and he definitely takes them to task when they say things that are completely unlibertarian. And I think that pretty much started off at the beginning when I guess Bill Weld started talking about, colluding, for lack of a better term, with telecom industries to bring them into Massachusetts and give them certain incentives and tax breaks, and Stossel calling them out about that, essentially being crony capitalism. And he didn't really seem to have a reply for that other than the fact that it works. And they got more jobs in there, but it is what it is. It is crony capitalism. And they pretty much started off with that.
No,
which I thought was interesting.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. It was fantastic. Yeah, I remember because the first question from the crowd, they did a lot of crowd questions in this one, was what would you do to create jobs? And I loved Gary Johnson's response right out of the gate, which was just to say the government doesn't create jobs. And that was it. Boom, end of sentence. And then, of course, Weld's going, well, let me talk about this. Small business doesn't need big tax cuts. They need assurances. Taxes are going one way, down, and they'll employ more people, which I also thought was a little bit ridiculous. It's so he's not saying to cut taxes, just as long as they think they'll go down, they'll be fine. And then, talking about sitting down with CEOs and making sure they get tax credits. And that the regulations favor them. It's are you kidding me, man? You're crony capitalists out the ass. Howie, what did you think of that?
Well, first, right before it started, John Stossel's doing the opening intro. And there was something like what is a libertarian? Gary Johnson and Bill Weld will answer that coming up. And I'm thinking in my head, they're probably not going to answer that question for anybody. And
no.
Sure enough, you could watch that. And what libertarianism really is about, you didn't hear. I think that's the biggest disappointment of this campaign is they could not possibly have picked a worse communicator of the ideas of liberty than Gary Johnson. And then even you said we're talking about the first question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Government doesn't create jobs. But, people who aren't familiar with this, which is, I think, what they're trying to get, why they want to be on these shows and get the message out. I think a lot of people need a little bit more of an explanation than that.
Well, that's a classic thing, though. Gary Johnson never explains his points well enough. He has this not one word, but he has a very encapsulated one-sentence answer, and then he just is yep, I did my talking point, and now I'm just going to be quiet. And Stossel, I was a little upset with Stossel because he would accept that a lot of the time and move on to another question, probably just because he was concerned about time.
I don't know that he really accepted a lot of it. He deadpanned a lot from what I was picking up. Yeah, he would look at him well, is that really what a libertarian would say? And then he would say, we're going to be back after this. It was kind of like he was looking at them like they were complete idiots and what they were talking about, and then he would take it to a commercial break. I kind of enjoyed his just straight man type playing off them and his sideways glances at what they were saying.
Yeah, well, speaking of, this is to skip forward a little bit because there were some fantastic moments in this debate. One of which was this tweet, which I will share from. It was like at the very end. This tweet, but from @JP Finney, and just speaking about how Gary's a goofball and how Stossel's kind of like, oh God. So he goes, "Does Gary Johnson think he can debate Trump and Clinton? His stage presence lacks command." And the crowd booed, but really they shouldn't. And so Stossel, he looks at Gary and he's like, what do you think about that? And Gary does this bizarre cackle, like into the camera. He's like, ah! And then the weirdest mug face to the side I've ever seen. Like, I don't even know how you would describe the look he gave. Anybody want to take a shot at describing to the audience the bizarre bird-like look he gave to the right at nothing in particular?
I can't describe it, but he's just such a weird dude. It's like, despite whatever his debating skills are, he's just so odd. Like, we don't want him. I don't think I want him on stage in the public eye and people thinking like, oh, this is what libertarians are. If we want to stop being in the fringe, be considered serious contenders, I don't think Gary Johnson's the person to represent that.
Yeah, exactly. And then also somebody else said, and Stossel even weighed in. He goes, well, you know what? That after Gary did that weird cackle and whatever shrug glance, and then Gary also sat there, leaned forward, and kind of put his head in his hand like he was listening to a small child tell him a story. It was so weird.
Yeah, I don't even want to touch that. I don't know what was going on there at the end, and if that was supposed to instill confidence in the libertarian faithful that he'd be able to hold its own. It was kind of embarrassing.
When he did that, didn't Stossel say, like, I think this is what they're talking about?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Stossel was like, this is what he means. Because Weld has more command, And then, of course, the best part was after Gary is called out on not having stage presence and not being the one, who can really voice it, who answers the question? Bill Weld answers the question.
Did you notice that most of Weld's answers were much longer and more detailed than Gary Johnson's?
Oh, yeah.
I think if someone was watching that debate or not the town hall and they saw Johnson and Weld and no one said who the presidential candidate was and who the vice presidential candidate was, I think 99% of people would think Bill Weld was actually the person running for president because Gary Johnson's just a goof. He doesn't have a lot to say. And Weld was interrupting him.
Yeah.
And contradicting him.
Yeah. We'll talk. Actually, while we're on that topic, I guess I'm completely abandoning the chronological order I was planning on going in. Screw that. Because there's one spot specifically I wanted to talk about where Weld completely contradicted him. And I was just like, are you arguing against yourself right now? Are you two debating yourselves on stage at this moment? And it was with foreign aid. If you guys remember this.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so somebody brought up foreign aid, and Gary Johnson goes, we should cut it. Why should we be building roads overseas when we need that infrastructure here? Fine. And granted, not to get into a whole, let's, have a public works thing where we're building roads here, but the infrastructure is shit. We can agree on that. And then Weld goes, well, yeah, but, except on Israel. I have a long history with Israel, and it'll be a cold day in July before we'd freeze them out. And then Stossel goes, so you guys don't agree on this? And you hear Weld go, right.
Actually, Johnson then was like, he's like, no, and he starts going into something that has nothing to do with it.
Nothing at all to do with it.
And then they just let it go. I wish Stossel called him to task on that, but they just went to the next topic.
Yeah, he's just like, Gary's just like, oh yeah, it's for food and medicine, but really just procs up foreign dictators. But yeah, Rico, like you're saying, he's interrupting him and contradicting him at the same time. It's like, shouldn't you guys talk about this ahead of time? Yeah, God forbid the topic of Israel comes up in a debate. Because people never talk about that.
I can only imagine after the town hall, they go backstage and Weld's like, you idiot! You don't talk unless I tell you to.
You don't listen. I can't believe Gary Johnson doesn't come out with black eyes all the time.
All the most awful stuff that's come out of this campaign has been from Weld. If he wasn't his running mate, if it was someone decent, I don't think I would be as down about this whole ticket as I am. But he's just terrible. He's so much worse than Johnson.
Bill Weld is a disaster, and he's like derailing this whole campaign here. He's maybe it's because Gary Johnson seems so, I guess, weak-willed. Essentially, he's too domineering. He takes up too much of the stage presence, I guess, and he just completely takes things over. And he's supposed to be the vice presidential candidate. I don't even know why he's there to begin with. I might not be like 60 years old and seen so many presidential elections and debates, but never before in my memory have I seen a vice presidential candidate take so much of the stage. I don't even think Bill Weld should be there, at least not at the beginning.
Yeah, can you imagine like Hillary's vice president? Well, who was it? Kaine? I already forgot. Like,
Tim Kaine.
And saying, well, I think Secretary Clinton might be missing the boat on this question.
Yeah, right? He would end up dead in a ditch the next day.
Yeah, this behavior is unheard of. Like, you're completely undermining your presidential running mate.
And not even being shy about it. I mean, it's one of those things you say, look, talk about it behind the scenes. If you disagree, you don't have to say anything. Like, Bill Weld didn't have to come out and talk about Israel and how they would never take funding off of Israel's plate. It's like, hey, Bill, just shut up and let it go. You don't have to talk.
He mentions again that he's friends with all these statists that he's going to take advice from. They're, went to law school with them, whatever. Good kids.
You went through law school with Russ Feingold. Okay, well, let him pick the next Supreme Court justice. That's great.
Isn't that like nepotism? And aren't you not supposed to do things like that? He seems pretty open with this, like, well, I'm going to give all these positions to my friends because I know them for a long time. Aren't you at least supposed to pretend like you don't do that and you get these positions by merit?
Yeah, Rika, who did you go to when you mailed away for that degree with your $25? Who else sent their check in? So speaking of the Supreme Court, though, I will say he's throwing out some names there, and Russ Feingold, who's considered one of the most progressive senators when he was in there. But I will say this, though. I'm not saying Russ Feingold is the best choice, but to defend Russ Feingold a little bit, and God, you know how I hate defending Bill Weld in any way, but Russ Feingold, to his credit, did vote against the Patriot Act, did try to make people aware of Section 215, and like our boy Randy Pants, also filibustered the Patriot Act renewal. So, I mean, hey, that's not too bad. Give him credit on that side of things.
That's fair
enough. Is Bill Weld against the Patriot Act? I wonder.
That's a very good question. I don't know.
Even if he said he was, I just don't trust him at all either. I mean, he says one thing on guns one day, he says something else another day.
Yeah, well, we addressed the whole gun issue where you can magically pull a pin out of the gun and make it into an automatic weapon in our last Mr. Johnson's Liberty Hood, which I will link to in the show notes. But yeah, Bill Weld, he's very hard to trust, and especially when you know now that he's completely down with cronyism. And that was a question too that came up during this debate. Somebody asked him, how would you support free markets while fighting cronyism? And Gary Johnson, after Bill Weld talks about what is essentially crony capitalism, which is pointed out by Stossel, he said, well, people associate it with cronyism, and we want the government out of it. And then he's talking about how he'd veto bills. And then Weld weighs in and goes, well, Warren, the Fed gal Warren says that government created jobs rather than business. And then it dropped one of the worst lines of the entire town hall. I hope you guys caught it. When he told them to gag him with a spoon. And I'm sure the people who write VH1 pop-up video for the 90s were like, hey, thank God Bill Weld's cribbing notes from our shows. Oh, so awkward, man. Just the crowd's like, ha, 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 ha. Thank you, Bill.
Oh, something that they were talking about when they were talking about business and that, Bill Weld's like, well, you know what? We believe that, a willing seller should be able to sell whatever they want to a willing buyer, whatever. I'm like, well, not when it comes to drugs. Your campaign doesn't think that heroin should be legal. And I bet if Stossel asked you guys about prostitution or something.
Yeah. I'm so sad that there wasn't a guy in the audience to ask him about legalizing prostitution like in the last CNN Anderson Cooper one. Where was that guy? Where was that hero? He's a hero of men. So how about this? Let's talk about another topic. Why don't we talk, like you mentioned the willing buyers and sellers. That was on the topic of Uber. And again, I like Stossel's point where Gary Johnson said, we want to make it easier for the sharing industry to thrive, like Uber, like Airbnb. And Stossel asked the question, which is a very pertinent question, why is it even a role for the president to be involved? And Gary said, yeah, well, we wouldn't put anything in the way, which that's fine. And I did actually like that Weld throughout that libertarian talking point, though, despite there's a little bit of hypocrisy there. But I like that they're actually throwing out a libertarian talking point that is willing buyers and sellers should be able to exchange goods and services without the government being involved.
I don't think Johnson got the point initially until Stossel actually said, why are you concerned about what happens in Austin, Texas? And then it was like a hint to Gary, like, yeah, this is not a problem for the federal government to be solved. And he's like, oh, yeah. So it's like, he just doesn't get it initially.
Do you think during the commercial breaks, every time they go to break, Stossel leans in and he's like, hey, moron, I'm trying to help you out here. Like, here's what I'm going to ask. Why don't you think about your answers ahead of time? Let me know. You give me a nod and I'll write down some keywords you can drop to the libertarian.
As soon as they go to a commercial break, Stossel leans back in his chair, throws his index cards behind him, and just sighs very loudly.
Probably. So I will now. How about this? Who wants to bring up the next topic? I'll throw it out there. How about Howie? What do you want to bring up in this forum for the next topic?
How about how nobody still knows who they are? They were showing they're just going around showing people on the street these big blown up photos of them, and no one knows who Weld and Johnson are. I mean, we're really looking at them under a microscope here, like on shows like this, but the general public has no idea.
I think that they actually should just have people constantly walking around with their faces on posters. Just that's it. Just to walk around being like, do you know who this is? And people be like, I have no idea. And then they can just yell Gary Johnson and throw a joint at him. And I think that'll get a lot of people.
I bet in 2008 or 2012, a lot of people would recognize Ron Paul for sure.
Yeah, true. I mean, Ron Paul, though, he has been in the public eye a little bit more. Well, I guess, a lot of people didn't really know who he was, is true. But Ron Paul would go out on a limb and fight a lot more, making very bold statements where, like we've said in the past, you don't hear many bold statements out of Gary.
No.
He just does because he doesn't want to throw rocks.
He believed in his convictions and he wasn't afraid to stand up for it, even if it was something unpopular or a part of libertarianism that is a little hard to grasp for someone not rooting the philosophy that's just hearing it for the first time. Drugs be legal, and Ron Paul's like, well, how many people here are going to start doing heroin if they legalize it? Like, oh, good thing we have the government to keep me from doing heroin, or I'd be a mess right now.
It also helped that Ron Paul was so deeply educated on the economic side of things, so he could constantly be in the public eye on CNN and on MSNBC and on Bloomberg talking about the economic ramifications of government action as well, whereas God forbid, could you see Gary out there talking about economics? That's another one. Does anybody in doubt that Gary will throw it to Bill Weld if it comes to anything in economic issues?
Oh, hold on. Let me get my tag team partner in here to answer this question, and they shuffle spots on stage.
I hope so. It's going to be like Step Brothers. They're just going to switch places, and it's going to be amazing. Or maybe they'll go into like a Cronenberg machine, like in The Fly. We might get a super candidate where they're going to get two pods, mash them together into the true Johnson Weld.
I'm not overly concerned about that because I hardly ever see these debates get that in depth in any particular topic to go into like the nuts and bolts of, the effects of government intervention in the economy. When do they ever even come close to going over something like that in a typical presidential debate? It's always like catchphrases and buzz terms, and I promise to do this. They never really go into any detail about anything.
They always say, go to my website and check out my 32-point plan for improving the economy. I wonder what, I haven't seen it, the Johnson Weld campaign website looks like. It's probably just like a picture of Johnson holding a cat or something.
Probably. It's probably a picture of Bill Weld majestically riding a stallion, and that's the only image. Johnson's not even on it.
Hey, since Johnson said he's not going to smoke pot when he's the president, I wish he would. Has he made any kind of pledge to like stop climbing mountains and things like that? Because if he dies, I do not want Weld. I'm much more concerned about him stopping his extracurricular activities besides marijuana than.
If Gary Johnson falls off a mountain when he was president, I'd want to know where Bill Weld was at the time.
Bill Weld coincidentally is climbing the exact same mountain about 10 feet higher
with his old friend Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. While we're talking about pot, there was a guy. So they did video questions from a producer in the field, and I got to play this one question so we can talk about the marijuana issue and Gary's response on it real quick. But listen to this question from the crowd real fast.
How are you going to legalize marijuana in all its forms? Cannabis, the plant, indica, sativa, and hemp. How are you going to do it?
Said like a true genius.
That guy was great.
It was amazing.
I'm only going to legalize it in 5 of its 6 forms.
And it's like, I swear to God, his eyes were looking in 2 different directions. I mean, he was a real find. But it does bring the question, how are you going to handle it? And Bill Weld, or not Bill Weld, Gary Johnson, he just said day one, we're going to deschedule weed as a class 1, which is good. And he mentioned banking, which is actually a pretty huge issue because a lot of the times people don't realize that it's not just the legalization on the state level, but, and there's been legislation put in place too that's going to free it up. But the biggest problem is these places, they have the legal weed business. However, from a federal standpoint, the banks won't deal with the money because it's technically illegal still. So they don't want to get into the whole money laundering thing. So that's a big issue. So it's interesting to hear Gary Johnson talk about the banking. But what else do you guys think he should have said about that? And we'll start with JB.
I think Gary's answer on this particular topic was pretty good. Descheduling it would definitely go a long way towards helping the states come up with their own legislation and ease things through without worrying about the federal government over their shoulders. And especially like you mentioned with the bank issue, bringing that up, looks like he's, at least this one aspect, he's thought it through and can present his case fairly well in a short amount of time. So I'm pretty happy with what he said. I don't feel the need to add any more to it.
All right. Howie, what about you?
I mean, I think his plan for marijuana is fine, but the real travesty here is the war on drugs, which is ruining lives. So many people, we have like nonviolent criminals locked up and just like families destroyed. I mean, that's a huge crisis. And I wish I had a champion of liberty out there somewhere that was talking about that instead of just, oh, well, I'm going to remove marijuana from being scheduled. And all right, great. But still.
No, he did talk about that a little bit because somebody asked him about how would he stop the war on drugs, but he kind of went back to the same thing about marijuana and focusing on treating drugs as a medical thing rather than a criminal thing. So, and he talked a little bit. There was a woman who, and this was awesome, actually. Do you remember there was a woman that was talking about the prison system, and she was prattling on. She was like, I go to a lot of prisons, and there's a lot of women in prisons.
What's your question, man?
Exactly. Stossel's so great. But your question, ma'am. God, I love you, John Stossel. John Stossel 2020, by the way. Come on, let's get him out there. I want him running.
And those ideas, too, are a step in the positive direction. So I don't want to give him, too much crap for it. But still, if they're still illegal, you're still going to have the black market with all the violence that comes with, all the, drugs that aren't what they're saying is being sold, maybe not the right quantity or the composition. And there's just so many problems that would still go on. It is better than what we do now, what Johnson would do, but still it's a half measure. I don't know.
I had a question about it. So he said they're not going to he'd remove it from the Schedule 1, I think, but that doesn't eliminate the possibility they'll put it in Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, which could also have a whole different range of penalties. So is he really going, that bold of a step for, is he going far enough?
I think he said he was going to. Yeah, I think he said that too. But even if they did make it Schedule 2, then anyone be able to get it with a prescription.
Yeah, but still, do you need a prescription to go buy a beer? No. This is a libertarian, and you're saying, well, I need to get a prescription from a doctor to get something that's less harmful than it seems a little
right. It's something that you can grow in your own backyard too. It's like, I need a prescription for that. Do I need a prescription? If I want to eat a handful of, let's say, I want to pick a pack of posies, like the old rhyme, and shove that in my mouth and eat it. Why should that be anybody's business? It's in my backyard. Yeah, you shouldn't have to get any sort of prescription for it. I agree that he should just be calling for full decriminalization and legalization nationwide of it. I mean, granted, the states can still do what they want with it, but on a federal level, legalize marijuana, baby.
People would vote with their feet if states are, criminalizing it. People would move, and they would see, other effects of their choices the states would. So, I mean, leave it up to the states, but the problem would take care, on its own.
Exactly. And also industry would pop up. I mean, we already see how the industry is really blown up in places like Colorado. So if states are legalizing it, you'd have a lot of industry that would draw people to work in those states as well. So yeah, there's no disincentive by saying from a federal level, this is legal. Go ahead, states, do what you want with it. It makes just vastly more sense. And I wish you would say something along those lines. Hey, Rico, while you were talking a bunch, how about you talk the next topic for us?
Okay, well, my favorite topic was, the last two questions. You already mentioned one of them, but the last two questions were basically listeners trolling Johnson and Weld. The one was do you have stage presence? And then Gary Johnson giggling, like, okay, no, is the answer to that one. And I think the last question was Bill Weld. Why do you claim to be a libertarian?
Yes, that was, I wrote this down exactly because I took a picture of it too, which I will post in the show notes at lionsofliberty.com/240. Yeah, Tasha Moore, and somebody find Tasha Moore on Facebook and invite her to join our forum because we need her in our Facebook forum. But yeah, it was, quote, Mr. Weld, what can you say to assure us you are in fact libertarian at heart? Because I'm just not believing it.
Great question. And, his answer was such bullshit. He's like, I wrote about Frederick Hayek in law school. I don't know what context was he writing about Frederick Hayek in law school.
That's right. Maybe he was arguing against everything he was saying.
Didn't Stossel say so what makes you different than a liberal Republican, really?
Yeah, exactly. And then Weld's other point of view, other cred, he goes, well, you know what? I walked into a room of people and I introduced myself as a libertarian and they were pretty quiet. It's like, that's great. That's a big one. Was anybody there to witness it? No? All right. Sounds good, Bill. Thanks a lot, buddy. Keep on moving. Yeah, nothing on the policy platform, nothing to really quantify his status as a libertarian in any way, shape, or form. Just the fact that he wrote a paper on Hayek in the past. I mean, hell, we all had to write a paper on Hitler, I'm sure, at some point growing up in high school, but it doesn't make us Nazis. Just want to say that. But yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. So I didn't get the sense that Weld really answered that question too well, but I did enjoy the listener effing with them a little bit. So that was great.
That was, it's always good to see it. I love that Stossel's just chucking it out there. When Stossel got that question, he was like, oh yeah, that's what we're finishing.
We're saving this for the end.
I'm going to lull him into a false sense of security and then bam, pow, right in the kisser. JB, how about you? Do you have a topic you want to throw out?
I actually, a couple, I guess. Well, I'd start with, I don't think they touched on the topic of, I guess, private business discrimination again. And
they did, yeah. You said they didn't or they did?
They did.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they answered that question at all. What do you guys think when they were, this is another instance where Weld interrupted Johnson while he was trying to give his position about whether they would force businesses to serve people that they didn't want to serve. And they kept, I think Stossel kept on asking them, should a Muslim entrepreneur have to sell pork because people wanted it? And I don't really think they gave an answer to what they would do if they were in the presidency to deal with this situation of private business discrimination. What do you guys think?
Well, I think you're exactly right to bring it up. And Weld's thing, they went into this tangent about this Utah religious law, which, by the way, has basically no impact on it. Because Weld's talking about how churches can do what they want. And Stossel called him out on that, too. He's like, yeah, but we're talking about businesses. We're not talking about churches here, man. What are you talking about? And yeah, it was I wrote in all caps in my notes, train wreck. Because Gary's talking about how, discrimination is the wrong thing to do and legislation, would force to sell with force. It's like, where are you going with it? What are you talking about? He still said you have to bake a cake. But then he goes, but you know what? But you don't have to decorate it because that would violate your First Amendment rights.
I wanted to slap him when he said that.
Right.
Like, you just don't get it, Gary. Just, God, I don't know if at this point it's like, he doesn't want to back off of it because it seems like that's like the one thing people are remembering about him. And if he backs off on it, then he has completely no credibility. But
he flipped on the carbon tax.
Yeah.
He tried to explain that too.
Why not flip on this?
Yeah. So for those of you, I'll link to the video to this too. But Gary Johnson, we called him out. Rico and I, another Mr. Liberty, Mr. Johnson's Liberty Hood, called him out on supporting carbon tax and got into an interesting tiff on our YouTube page with a libertarian who was all for carbon tax, which was interesting. But Gary has now flip-flopped on it, saying, "Oh no, the legislation I was reading, I thought it did something else, and no, I'm not for a carbon tax anymore."
Well, it seemed like he said the carbon tax he just couldn't figure out a way to make it work at this time. Like, he wasn't completely backing off of it. He's just like, it's impractical the way it's currently.
Yeah, he still thinks in principle it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Which it's not.
I don't know that he's completely doing a 180 on the carbon tax, but he's not shifting at all on this religious liberty. And for some reason, he hasn't even gotten a more well thought out answer in all these months. Like, at least he could try to articulate some semblance of reasoning behind it, but they're still just hemming and hawing, and it's just awkward and uncomfortable to watch him try to explain it.
Agreed. It's like, do they have people? I mean, I do PR for a living. There's got to be, I'm sure I could come up with about 15 different ways you could talk about this topic and not sound as stupid as he always sounds on it. And especially the worst thing he said during this, when he was trying to defend this train wreck of an answer, is he goes, well, the situation doesn't exist. It's like, if it doesn't exist, then why were we talking about it? Why have we been talking about it for the last 2 years? And why is there legislation being put in place if it doesn't exist? Clearly, it comes up fairly often.
If you held his beliefs and thought that this was an issue and something should be done, wouldn't a libertarian solution be to stop government subsidizing of like the coal industry and other like fossil fuel, the oil companies? How about that? Why don't you let it cost what it would really cost on the market and let a real free market solution work instead of some government scheme that's just going to make some people rich and do nothing at all?
Yeah. Well, let's move on to another topic, staying on the town hall. There's one I want to talk about, which was education. I liked what happened with education. I liked their answers. I think that's one of their better topics, in truth. And basically, somebody had brought up the topic saying, what would you do to help American schools and yada, yada. Gary came out and said, I would just abolish the Department of Education straight out, which is great. And then Weld was talking about getting more charter schools, which initially I was like, I don't know about that because they get government money. But I did a little bit of research, and there's an interesting instance in Louisiana. So Louisiana, after all the flooding happened, or after Katrina happened, they went on basically like an all charter school plan. And essentially what happened there is they had 5-year contracts, and the contracts are like perform or bust. After 5 years, they look at the performance of the school, and then if they don't like it, blam, your school's like done. You're effed. And the parents also had school choice. They could go to pretty much any district in the area or any school in the area. So what did you guys think about that answer?
Well, apparently, I don't watch the show anymore because I can't take it. But apparently, John Oliver did a big thing about how charter schools are just fraudulent and a waste of money. And I think he completely missed, from what I read about his segment, he completely missed the boat on it. Picking like 1 or 2 charter schools that have, incompetent faculty or poorly run. Of course, there's going to be schools. You could find any public school, district in the country almost that's poorly run. But I
would challenge people to find ones that aren't poorly run.
Yeah, exactly. But charter schools on a whole cost less than public schools and achieve better results if you kind of weigh against the, results of public schools in the same area. So I don't think there's anything wrong per se with charter schools. You're not going to get rid of at least some kind of state funding for schools, period. But I think it's definitely a way to improve school performance. The part about eliminating the Department of Education seems kind of like a layup for a libertarian. So I don't really give them that much credit for that answer. But
yeah, I went to Catholic school for 1st through 12th, and I always thought it was crazy that my parents had to pay taxes for public schools too, even though they had to pay for my education on top of that.
Yeah, I agree. You should be able to get, 100%, if you're putting your child through a school system, I think you should have a tax credit where you get that money back. You shouldn't be paying for someone else's kids if you're not paying for your own children to use that.
But that's a local issue. That's, not going to be solved at the federal level.
Agreed.
But it's something people should be aware of at least, and maybe realize, look, you're a large... education problems are not solved by throwing more money at schools because
No, but I mean, it doesn't solve the problem. But I do think that vouchers would be better. So if someone wants to send their kids to a private school, they should use that tax money that's already been taken from them to put towards that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
Go ahead, JB.
Speaking about local versus federal level, another person asked a question in the education vein. I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but he basically said, if there wasn't a Department of Education or federal oversight where I grew up, the community would have pressured the school into teaching creationism over evolution.
Yeah.
Which I think is a bad idea. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that was an interesting question. I thought that Gary Johnson kind of did a good job answering it, though. He basically said it's not our job to police that.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said, which is a very libertarian answer. He said that's basically not our problem. It's out of our hands if the local community decides to do that. But what I want to I guess the topic I want to broach is that necessarily the case? If libertarian or not, do you think that it's a good idea because local or federal, we're still one country. Do you think it's in the best interest of everyone to be learning different things?
Here's the answer to that. If you can't say, the obvious answer is to move, to a different school district. Okay. But say it's not it's not that easy just to move, to move your house and, find a new house and whatever. The secondary answer is, okay, get a library card. If you don't like what your kids are learning in school, you say, okay, well, this is what they're teaching. My efforts at the PTA have been unsuccessful. Everyone in the community is on board to teach creationism. All right, I understand. As a parent, I see what you're being taught in school. I don't really agree with it. Here, let's go to the library, get a book. You read this, and then you question your teacher at school.
Well, also, here's another thing that, God, I'm going to say another thing that I like that Bill Weld said. He's mind welded me, people. He's gotten in my brain.
Mind weld.
God damn him. I'll have a colostomy bag any minute now. No, but Bill Weld talked about the fact that he said, I'm all for homeschooling, including distance education for K through 12. And I think that is a great concept where you say, okay, an example where you have a local school district that says, hey, you know what? We want to believe in creationism. That's what we're going to teach. That's what the local people have decided, and fine. To have that option to say, fine, you do that. I'm going to keep my kid home. I'm going to homeschool him, and he's going to use distance learning because now there are K through 12 distance education programs. And I think that's great. I think it's a fantastic free market solution.
Doesn't Ron Paul have a homeschool program?
What doesn't Ron Paul have? He's great. He's
amazing. I wish he was just a little. If he was just a little bit younger, we need him today. I don't know, more than anything.
Yeah, I know, man. Well, you know what? You can't think about what we don't have, and you don't know what you had until it's gone, Howie. That's a fact. But yeah, the education. I mean, what do you guys think that's to me, that seems like a fantastic solution to pretty much all that ails you if you have an issue with your local school system. So what do you guys think about the concept of putting that out? And it could be private companies doing it as long as they can be. Well, this also brings up a question of licensing, though. And you'd have to have a licensing body, or you don't have to have a licensing body, but for education, and then saying, okay, what does and doesn't count as a legitimate high school degree? So I guess there's problems on top of it. So what do you guys think of that concept, though,
I think it's a great concept, but it would have to go hand in hand with what Howie was talking about in receiving tax credits. Because I know I don't have any children, but as a parent, if I'm paying for the school district teaching something I don't agree with on a fundamental level, and then decide to pull my children out and pay more money so they can get what I deem a proper education, I would want that money back. And if I can't get that money back, it's going to be a problem for me. So I think those two topics kind of go hand in hand. You have to have both for it to really be an effective system.
Yeah, bam. How about, by the way, here's another bam talking about education from John Stossel, the best. So they were talking about student debt, if you guys remember that. And I'm not going to go too much into student debt, but Gary Johnson did have a great answer on that, just saying that the reason for high debt is government guaranteed student loans. So the government has a lot to do with the debt and the raising tuition. So good job on that point, Gary. But I loved where this kid said, what are you going to do to help me with my student debt? And John Stossel, of all people, he goes, you know what I keep waiting for? I keep waiting for a libertarian to answer that, what will you do to help me with my debt? That's by saying nothing.
Again, John Stossel with the better answer than the libertarian candidates. And that questioner was kind of peculiar because he started off, I think, saying, well, I understand government involvement has, caused all these problems, but what are you going to do for me? It's like, well,
yeah,
your second part of your question completely ignores the logic in the first part of your question. So maybe some critical thinking skills are in order too.
Yeah, man. Next time you want to get on national TV, make sure you've thought this out.
All the more reason he wants that money back. Obviously, he's learned nothing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, how about this? Well, I want to talk about one more topic, and then we'll bounce it and talk about a couple other quick things. I want to play another little clip that came up because they were talking about foreign and the involvement with the military, which let's talk real quick about Bill Weld's answer on the military. Do you guys remember? Who wants to throw it out? Who remembers what Bill Weld said about the military and our military supremacy?
Not me.
I actually don't remember.
Neither do I.
All right, then. All right. Well, I guess we'll just keep on moving. I'll tell you guys, because it was a fantastic answer to make fun of. And even John Stossel made fun of it. So they're asked about the military might and how are we going to keep it safe? Some guy's like, I'm voting for Trump because I think he's going to keep me safe from the boogeyman. And
that guy.
Yeah. And Bill Weld said, well, we need to have military supremacy in the air and in the naval department, and we need to demonstrate that supremacy. And John Stossel was like, wait a minute. Hold on now. You're talking about military supremacy and demonstrating that, but you want to cut military? Like, what the hell are you talking about? And then, of course, Bill Weld had to clarify a little bit and say, well, yeah, but no boots on the ground, and unless we were attacked, and no involvement in regime change. And that will lead me into this next clip that I need to play that was fan-freaking-tastic. Now, just give a quick listen to this gem of a man.
I believe regime change and regime change worked in Germany. It has worked in Japan, and it worked in Iraq until Obama pulled out. Why not support boots on the ground when the U.S. Assets are essentially at stake?
Germany and Japan.
So
this freaking guy.
I mean, what can you say to that, really? Like, again, who's vetting these questions? I wonder, did John Stossel just go, this question is so dumb, we have to allow it?
I think they somehow turned this guy's microphone off because Gary was like trying to engage in a back and forth with them, and then you could see him. He was talking back a little bit, and then Gary went again, and then you could see him talking again, but there was no sound out of his mic. So I think they're like, okay, enough out of this guy is enough. Yeah,
because it's just so crazy. It's like, regime change worked in Germany and Japan. It's like, that was called World War II.
So we killed Hitler, or I guess.
It's like, remember that regime change when Napoleon was defeated? Same thing. Stupid. It's just such a stupid statement. Open war. And then he's talking about Iraq, but Gary had a good response on Iraq though. It's like, he talked about, he goes, you don't believe that we got, because we got involved in Iraq isn't why we got involved in Iran, and Al Qaeda fled and became ISIS. And you don't think that was a consequence, the unintentional arming of ISIS. So he actually had a pretty good answer to that moronic question. So at least he can hit the softballs.
Well, he didn't come out strong enough, I thought, because he kind of engaged, like I said, in a little back and forth with this guy, where instead of just saying, you're wrong, come on, for all these reasons, your premise of the question is incorrect. And Gary just kind of well, do you think that it worked? Blah blah. It's like, come on, Gary, just be strong in your answers. That's what
Could you guys imagine how good all these answers would have been if Rand Paul got to ask them? I'm not even talking about Ron Paul, but Rand Paul would be doing great against Trump, Hillary, Gary. I'll put all these people together.
Yeah, Rand Paul was amazing on foreign everything on foreign intervention. Rand Paul was pretty much amazing on. But you know what? Actually, hey, for the first time I can recall, the phrase blowback was mentioned in one of these town halls. Granted, it came up from an audience question, but somebody from the audience asked him, "Do you believe in blowback?" And finally, Gary Johnson said, "Yes." Yes, he believes in blowback. He tied it in kind of with the drone stuff, but he said, yes, it's totally all blowback, what's happening with ISIS. So thank God that phrase has finally been thrown out there. I'm just glad he knows what it is. And it's not just something that he thinks is involved with when you take a big hit of a joint and you blow it in someone else's mouth and you kind of just go back and forth with it.
Shotgun.
Gary's like, oh, I love blowback. It's the best. All right, so overall then, guys, let's wrap it up. What do you give a grade from, let's do like the school grading. So A, B, C, D, E, F. There's no E, but A through F. What do you give Gary and Bill for this most latest performance? Let's start with JB.
I'm going to go harsh. I'm going to give them a D. Maybe a D plus. Is that really a grade? C minus is the less you can get, right? And then D's and F's. There's no D plus.
There's no D pluses. Yeah, I don't think those exist.
I'll give them a C minus.
All right, C minus.
It was some libertarianism leaking through there, but the presence of Weld and how like domineering he is and contradictory kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And all the things he says contradictory to what Johnson says are always, without a doubt, anti-libertarian. So, on second thought, I'm going to drop that back down to a D. Now that I talked it through, I'm going to give this a D. I wasn't really pleased with this showing. I felt it was pretty poor.
All right. What about you, Rico?
I agree with JB completely. I feel it was a D. None of their answers were really inspiring to me. Their presentation is not inspiring. They don't exude any particular charisma or charm that you're like, oh, these guys are great, I want to learn more about them. In fact, the more you learn about them, the less likely you are probably to like them. The only positive from them is the fact that they're being given airtime, that their Fox Business News is trying to push them in some ways, but just the way they come off, that's all I can say.
Howie?
So the last time I was on the Lions of Liberty podcast, I said I felt bad for being so hard on Gary Johnson because he's so much better than Hillary or Trump. And like that right after that aired, it's like one thing after another that they come out with, whether it's Weld and the assault rifles, carbon tax, everything. And for a Libertarian town hall, I'm going to give them an F because they have completely failed at conveying the message of liberty. They are not professional at all. They're an embarrassment to the Libertarian Party. I think they hurt the cause. And I mean, I know some people support them, but they're also attracting people who aren't libertarians, and it's just going to poison the party. I really think this is terrible, such a missed opportunity. This could have been such a great chance, and I feel like they fail at what we should want to try to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not going to give them high marks. I'm going to give them slightly higher marks than you guys, just because I've been following them so much now that I can see where they're making slight improvements, and there's some of the answers they got out there were a little bit better. So I'm going to give them a C minus because they did get some talking points out there. Foreign aid answer was good. Acknowledging blowback was good. They had some good answers. The education answers were good. I'll give them a little bit of credit, but overall, I agree. They swing and miss so often, and Weld is such an awful influence, an awful voice for liberty. He's completely unlibertarian in every way. Good job, Tasha Moore, on calling him out. And John Stossel, God bless him, he is fantastic at this, and he really exposed. I mean, he's trying to give them more light and more airtime. which is great for the average person. But, for us libertarians, it really does expose just how unlibertarian they are. And that is frustrating as hell. So, yeah, not great.
I consider Johnson Weld as a team, as they've explicitly stated they are, many, many times. But if this had just been Johnson and none of the stuff Weld says or does has been a part of it, I think Johnson could have squeaked out a C- for me.
Yeah, exactly. But Bill Weld really cuts him down quite a bit. And that's what it happens all the time. We do Mr. Johnson's Liberty Hood. Gary will be cruising along doing okay. And then you get Bill Weld in the mind weld here. And it just is like, bam, John's off. And by the way, guys, there is a Mr. Johnson's Liberty Hood that's going to be coming up in a couple of weeks. And that's going to have comedian Ryan Stout on it, who is supporting Johnson. So this is interesting because we're talking about it. We're all talking inside ball here. So it's going to be interesting when I have him on the show. And he is hilarious, by the way. You got to check out he don't give no shits in his comedy. He is hilarious and mean. But he just, he's coming from an outsider's perspective. So it's going to be interesting to hear his take when we do Johnson's and John's offices, because he's not going to be dissecting it as deeply as we are. So that'll be a fun exercise. Now, one more thing I want to talk about before we wrap this up. It's been a huge news story, and that is all of the discussion about this Epi-Pen. And if you guys at home have not been following the story, basically, this drug company has raised the cost of the Epi-Pen. It used to be $100. Now they've raised it all the way up to, I believe it is $500. And they did it over the course of, over the course of 7 years, they've raised it exponentially. And now this latest increase is just unforgivable in the eyes of many people, including myself. And there's a reason for that, because it's not tied into the free market. Now, you guys might know jack about this, but if you have a take on it, I'm open to hearing it, and then I'll give my own little diatribes a little bit later on. Howie, I know you're tied into this.
I don't know that I'm tied into it.
I mean, not tied into it from a personal standpoint. We know your girlfriend's a spy for the NSA, and she's listening to this, so don't reveal too much.
He's a stockholder, so he can't disparage the company too much. So
I really think that the price raise in the Epi-Pen isn't the issue at all. The issue is the FDA and our whole medical and insurance system in America, and how expensive it is and how long it takes to bring a drug to trial. I think that's why there aren't competitors. There's too many regulations and loopholes to jump through to get something on the market that, why should I start up an Epi-Pen company?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's where, to give a little bit more background. So specifically, the company we're talking about is called Mylan. And the CEO of the company is named Bresch. I'm blanking on her first name right now. But her father, Heather Bresch, her father was a senator for a long time, and
he is a senator now.
He's still a senator.
Yeah,
so
mansion.
Her career coincidentally went upwards with his career. Like, she became, quote unquote, worked her way up in this company, but really was just promoted and promoted. She was made a lobbyist when he was in the Senate. Coincidence? Where they got a lot of benefit. And to your point, Howie, a lot of what has to do with these price increases is not free market. It is complete crony capitalism in every possible way. Because I keep wanting to say Mylan managed to do through a lot of their influence through lobbying in this crony capitalist system is they were able to get their only patent on the market, and then the government then put all these different regulations and, like you said, loopholes in there, or not loopholes, but hoops that people had to jump through that were competitors. So Epi-Pen is a worse product that has to be adopted by schools because the government mandated that they would give grants only to schools that got blocks of Epi-Pens, which means Epi-Pen can raise the prices, kind of like just like our tuition rates go up because the government's backing it. And now any competitor that comes into the market has to abide by completely different standards than Epi-Pen does. So,
you're right.
Yeah, go ahead, JB.
I find it absolutely hilarious in the same vein that this Mylan heavily lobbied the federal government to mandate that every airline, not just American Airlines, mind you, any airline that flies into the United States has to have Epi-Pens on the airplane. And before jacking up the price to like $600 a pen.
Right.
So they mandate like with in addition to the schools, to airlines too, that they have to carry these things, and then we're going to increase the price by like 300%, just so just to pad onto that. I'm like, this is unbelievable. Like, how exactly does this work?
Seriously, it's nuts. It's like the opposite of the Russian bride scam, where the Russian bride fucks you before they get in bed with you, then they refuse to have sex with you. This is the complete opposite.
What?
Don't worry, it makes a lot of sense.
Well known.
But yeah, it's so unbelievable that the government has just bought into this. I mean, well, no, it's not unbelievable. It's completely par for the course that the government has bought into this. But all these idiots out there are saying, this is an example of runaway capitalism, and I can't believe this is happening. It's like, no, the government has allowed this to happen. The FDA taking 8 years to approve anything and costing millions and millions of dollars to do it, and putting all these different hoops that you have to jump through to get a product onto the market is responsible for this 100%. And people don't understand that. And of course, the liberal media is not going to report that. They're just going to report, oh my God, the prices went up on Epi-Pens. How are we going to stop our children from choking on peanuts and dying, So anyway, that's the Epi-Pen angle that I just wanted to bring up real quick, because it needed to be addressed. We're talking about this show right now, and it pisses me off so bad reading about it, because it's literally everything wrong with government, crony capitalism, nepotism, and everything else. And let me see, what are we at time-wise now? One more quick thing, and then we're going to cut it. Let's just talk real quick about the Obamacare exchanges completely collapsing at an exponential rate here. Anybody want to do a quick take on the Obamacare exchanges here? JB, you're a man of science. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm not up to date on that, so I'm going to take a pass on it.
Why do I have you people on this show? Why do I even bother?
I have a comment about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Howie.
I really think that it was designed from the beginning to fail, that they knew that it wasn't going to work. And at the end, they're going to be able to blame it on greedy insurance companies and try to get through nationalized one-payer healthcare. Just, a complete socialist system, I think, is what they will propose when this all falls apart.
This is interesting. I like going down conspiracy lane with this.
But wasn't Hillary a proponent of single-payer healthcare back in 92 when Clinton first got elected?
Yes, she was.
She was.
So perhaps they devised this all along, like you said. They said, okay, well, it's going to blow up. Hillary will get Donald Trump to run against her in 2016. Obviously, that'll be a joke. She'll win, and then they could push forward the single-payer scheme.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is true. I didn't think about it that way, but it may be, because you look at all these insurance companies, like Aetna is the recent one to pull out of it. And they said all these promises have been broken that the government made. So, the government clearly is not going out of its way to really try to make this thing work. And yeah, the pure numbers from its number standpoint, it doesn't make any sense, because of course the amount of people that are going to come on that are going to buy into all these programs are going to be the people that cost the most money that were not able to get insured. So yeah, it's completely unsustainable, and they're losing money in leaps and bounds. The thing is that really screws all of us, by the way, is a lot of them have it in place where there's also deals with the government where the government pays for their losses. So, I mean, even though they're dropping out, we're still getting a massive tax bill because of it.
The government hasn't been paying them what they promised, though, either.
Well, that's one of the broken promises. So you may just be right. You may be right that they're like, we got to give some sort of lip service. We'll put out this horribly flawed product, and then people will see. It's the false flag of healthcare. They false flagged us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not usually a conspiracy-minded person, but I really do think it
really,
is.
Howie?
And they're gonna blame the insurance companies and the greedy people trying to make a profit. They don't care about the sick, and it's this is their plan all along.
It'll be interesting to see if that comes up at all in these debates. The greedy insurance companies taking advantage. If Hillary kind of tries to start leading us down that road, I will be paying attention to that.
I'm sure it will. And I wonder what Donald Trump's take on that, because Donald Trump has said that he wants to take a free market approach to healthcare. It's one of the few good things about Donald Trump that he said. Granted, he might flip flop on that later.
Well,
what
he said in the past that he supported a single payer, but circumstances have changed apparently so much.
Right. Yeah. Now he wants to deregulate it and allow healthcare across state lines, which would be great, which they should do. But yeah, who the hell knows what Donald Trump actually thinks? All right, guys. Well, you know what? Let's wrap this puppy up. I think we've talked a good deal about the Libertarian Town Hall. We all love John Stossel and wish that he was actually our candidate. I think we can agree on that pretty wholeheartedly. And
he could run a better campaign just like in the last 5 minutes of his show than like if he just put out, some kind of statement every week than Johnson and Will do on it as their full-time job.
Pretty much. Can they hire him somehow to just take that? Can they hire him as campaign manager? How much money will it take? I'll finally give Johnson and Weld money. I'll buy a bumper sticker of Bill Weld's colostomy bag if it'll get them enough money to hire John Stossel as their campaign manager. There has to be a way to do it. All right, guys. Well, let's wrap it up. Let's give the audience a little send off as we always do, and as Mark loves to do. So, guys, won't you join me in live long
And live free.